Be lifted high, be lifted high.
Hi, Shallow Family. Midweek Refuel. Tonight we are finishing Acts chapter 15. Just a short section of verses, but lots of material in there that we can glean from. It's very real and something that is very relatable. So let me share my screen here and we will get going. I think it's just 36 to 41 in terms of verses, but let's check it out here. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's travel to the regions where we've preached the word of God and see how the believers are getting along." Remember that statement. Verse 37. Barnabas wished to take Mark, also known as John, along with them. But Paul disagreed. He didn't think it was proper to take the one who had deserted them in south central Turkey, leaving them to do their missionary work without him. It became a heated argument between them, a disagreement so sharp that they parted from each other. Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, and Paul took Silas as his partner. After the believers prayed for them, asking for the Lord's favor on their ministry, they left for Syria and southeast Turkey. Every place they went, they left the church stronger and more encouraged than before. Okay, so let's hit a couple of highlights here. First of all, Paul has a discussion with Barnabas, and he's thinking either really apostolically, a mix of apostolically and pastorally, because he wants to go back and follow up with the churches that they preached at to see how everyone is doing. And so Barnabas has an idea that let's take John Mark with us, and Paul doesn't like that idea. And they have a huge disagreement over that issue to the point where they decide that they aren't even going to travel together. They're going to split up, and each of them is going to cover a different territory. So it's getting real here. Here they are preaching the gospel and they aren't getting along. And I don't know about you, but that encourages me, because if even the super apostle Paul has disagreements with people, then I guess we can have those too. But it doesn't stay there. It doesn't stay at that point, and we'll talk about how that unfolds going forward. But let's talk about the heart of the disagreement. One thing to know, a couple things to know. One is that Mark is thought to be the one who wrote the book of Mark. And that was something that I actually wasn't aware of until I started digging into this passage. I thought it was someone else, but scholars believe that he was the one, and in fact, they believe he was the one that transcribed a lot of Peter's messages and accounts of his time with Jesus. And according to history, Mark was the earliest gospel written right around between AD 60 and AD 70. Many believe it was closer to AD 70 after the destruction of Jerusalem. So, Mark was certainly in the mix of things that were happening in and around the time of Jesus and the disciples who eventually became the apostles. The other piece of information that's good to know is that Barnabas and Mark were cousins. And so that would tell you that Barnabas had some compassion for his cousin. So before we go on with that, let's talk about, why did Mark leave Paul and Barnabas when they were in Pamphylia? Well, there was lots of, which, by the way, I don't know how to pronounce Pamphylia. I should probably look that up, but that's what it says. Anyway, they were in that region together, and there's some different accounts, different thoughts on why Mark would have left them. One is that he was homesick to go back to Jerusalem. The second was that he wasn't keen on some of the persecution that they were getting, and so he decided that he wanted to leave. And then the final, or one of the other thoughts, is that he was not keen on their ministry to the Gentiles. And so he decided that he didn't want to hang around. I don't know that any of those are true. Those are just speculations of why Mark deserted. I know that there is some emphasis or thought that there was immaturity on the part of Mark, and that is why Paul had such a strong reaction to not wanting to take him. But again, Barnabas being related to Mark, I think Barnabas also having more of a pastoral lean towards his ministry. Paul and Barnabas were gifted differently. I think they worked well together because Paul had more of a prophetic black and white edge, and Barnabas could come and pastor people. And so they made a good team, but in this particular case, they didn't see eye to eye on this particular brother, cousin in Barnabas's case. But you can see where Barnabas would have compassion on a family member who's working through some things, and we deal with that, right? Like even in our own life, there's times where there's people that are messing up, and sometimes those who are not connected to that person are more judgmental of that person. Sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes the family member is more judgmental of that person. It just depends. Um, but we have to learn how to have patience and love for people. Sometimes we have to learn that maybe I'm not the person to minister to that person because I don't have that grace. Paul in this situation did not have grace for John Mark, and so it wouldn't have probably been good for him to take John Mark with them because he would have been frustrated and angry and distracted by that instead of doing what he was supposed to be doing, where Barnabas had more of a grace for him. And so my point there is that sometimes we have grace for people and we are willing to help them walk through some areas where they need growth. And other times we have less grace for people, and I don't know that we have to look at it from a judgmental standpoint of judging Paul for where he was at or judging Barnabas for being too lenient. I think that what we see at the end result here is that they were blessed in their journey and that both of them went out and strengthened and built up the believers. And so God didn't hold their disagreement against them. Disagreements happen. And the ultimate end result is that Paul ended up counting on Mark in ministry later on in his ministry, that there were times that he specifically referenced getting Mark to do a specific task because he could count on him. So obviously there was a reconciliation that happened later, and perhaps it was the ministry of Barnabas to Mark to help him grow, to help him mature, that caused him to be somebody that Paul could count on. And that's where, as believers, we're in this together. Not to belabor a point, but sometimes we have grace for people that other people don't have grace for. And that's okay because that just means that I'm supposed to be the one walking them through their journey to maturity because I'm willing to help them in areas where they make choices that aren't the greatest. And other times, I don't have as much grace, and that just means that someone else has that grace for that person. And that's where we get to look out for one another, especially in church, because we're all in different places. We're all growing at different levels. Some are really listening to Jesus and following his directions. Others are sort of halfway in. Sometimes people are right at the beginning. Everybody's at a different place. But as a family, we come together and we cover one another and we work together as a team and we bring out those gifts that each one of us carries, that is vital to the functioning of the body. And so on Sunday, I was joking around, I was picking on Dave a little bit, talking about how, Dave Wilson, who's one of our elders, and he's just one of the most loving people you'll ever meet. And I was talking about how I never have to motivate Dave to be nice to people or to love people. That's just what he does. And when he functions in that gift, it's really very powerful. And we want that to be accentuated. We want that to be coming to the forefront in our body because we need Dave's input. While others might come behind them and be more direct. Jamie is more direct in her approach with people, not because she wants to hurt them or to tear them down, but because she wants them to get over a specific issue that they're dealing with. So she might need to be in certain situations where someone needs to be held accountable. Again, not that Dave can't do that, but the way that Dave would do it is different than the way that Jamie would do it. And it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. I think when I first started in ministry, I'm more of a pastoral person. I have more patience with people. And so I always felt like that was the right thing to do. Like, you need to be patient with people. That's what it means to be a pastor. And that just is my particular viewpoint on ministry. But I've come into seasons where I've let something go too long and it becomes something that is hurtful to the person because I'm not saying, hey, you need to change this. And so I've needed Jamie in my life to come in and go, you need to call that person to account, because if we don't, we're just enabling the bad behavior. So hopefully that makes sense, that we are together, becoming a family who looks out for one another, and we need different gifts at different times. And I think we see that playing itself out very well in this situation, even though they were in a disagreement, which I don't think God wants us to be in a disagreement where we're not walking together. But there will be times where we disagree and we just have to work through it. And, in the end, a great testimony of this is that John Mark was relied upon by Paul, because I believe of the work of Barnabas, believing in his cousin, investing in his cousin, and seeing Mark's gifts come to the forefront. And so, I mean, we read his gospel. In fact, we're reading his gospel on Thursday nights, and it's a powerful thing. There's a lot of powerful stories and testimonies in that gospel, and Mark is responsible for that. And if Barnabas hadn't believed in him, maybe we wouldn't have that book. I don't know. But it is a testament to how we can be in disagreement. We have different gifts. We're a family, and at the end of the day, we have to come together and honor each other for who we are, and without stumbling over who we're not. So hopefully that's encouraging to you. Even the apostles had issues, and so do we. And it's okay, because God's going to help us through those things, because ultimately we're becoming like Jesus, and that is the whole entire point. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week for Acts chapter 16.
Be lifted high, be lifted high.